Mom's monthly book club meeting was held in our living room, complete with wine, cheese, and the kind of literary discussion that made the neighborhood women feel intellectually superior. At 33, I was the spinster daughter who lived next door, and they never let me forget it. Elena's our resident bookworm, Mom announced to the circle of women, gesturing toward me as I refilled their wine glasses. 33 years old and still single, living alone with her books and her causes. It's so sad, really. The book club members nodded sympathetically while I served crackers and tried to remain invisible. My PhD in international relations and my work with refugee organizations were consistently framed as hobbies rather than serious humanitarian work. She's always been different, Mrs. Patterson from across the street explained to the newer members. More interested in reading about foreign countries than finding a husband. Some women just aren't cut out for normal life. I'd moved back next door to help care for my aging parents, but my family interpreted this as evidence that I'd failed at independence. They didn't know that my hobby of working with displaced populations had quietly become one of the most effective refugee assistance programs in the Western Hemisphere. The problem is she thinks she's going to save the world, Mom continued, accepting sympathy like I was terminally ill. Always working on these international projects, traveling to dangerous places. No man wants a wife who's never home. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded knowingly. My daughter went through a phase like that too, wanting to help everyone except herself. Thankfully she met Robert and came to her senses. Now she has 3 beautiful children and focuses on what really matters. The condescension was suffocating. My family saw my work establishing refugee camps, negotiating with governments and coordinating international aid as an elaborate way of avoiding adult responsibilities like marriage and children. What exactly does she do anyway? Asked Janet, the newest book club member. I mean, besides the volunteer work? She has some kind of consulting business, Mom said dismissively. Works with the United Nations sometimes, but it's not steady income. No benefits, no security. She could have been a teacher or a nurse. Something practical. I took a sip of wine and stayed quiet. What they didn't know was that my consulting work had led to developing protocols that had saved over 200,000 lives during the Syrian refugee crisis. 3 world leaders had personally thanked me for my coordination efforts, but explaining that would sound like fantasy. The saddest part is she's so intelligent, Mrs. Patterson said with genuine pity. All that education wasted on humanitarian nonsense when she could have used it to build a real career. And at 33, her biological clock is ticking. The book club continued their analysis while I thought about the call I'd received yesterday from the White House. They'd asked me to keep the information confidential until the official announcement, but the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony was scheduled for next month. She's probably one of those women who thinks she's too good for regular men, Janet observed. Career women always have impossible standards. They want someone as accomplished as they are, but successful men want wives who prioritize family. Mom sighed dramatically. Exactly. Elena's so focused on helping strangers that she's forgotten how to help herself. No husband, no children, just endless travel and meetings about people she'll never see again. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they discussed my failures, I was coordinating refugee resettlement programs across 4 continents. Last month alone, my protocols had helped establish safe housing for 15,000 displaced families. Turn on some background music, Mrs. Rodriguez suggested. Something calming while we discuss next month's book selection. Mom reached for the remote but accidentally turned on the news channel. A breaking news banner was scrolling across the bottom about presidential awards. Oh, boring political stuff, Janet complained. Can we change it? I don't want to think about politics during book club. But the news anchor was announcing the recipients of this year's Presidential Medal of Freedom. Among this year's honorees is Dr. Elena Vasquez, whose revolutionary approach to refugee assistance has transformed international humanitarian response. The room fell silent as my name echoed through the living room. Elena Vasquez? Mrs. Patterson said slowly. That's your Elena. Mom grabbed the remote to turn up the volume as my official photo appeared on screen. Dr. Vasquez has coordinated relief efforts that have saved an estimated 200,000 lives, the anchor continued. Her innovative protocols for rapid refugee camp establishment are now used by aid organizations worldwide. The book club sat frozen as the news explained my humanitarian achievements. The anchor mentioned my work in Syria, Afghanistan, and South Sudan, crediting my coordination efforts with preventing multiple humanitarian disasters. "But that's our neighbor Elena," Janet whispered. "The spinster who lives alone." The news continued with footage of refugee camps I'd helped establish, interviews with families I'd helped relocate, and quotes from world leaders praising my humanitarian innovations. The UN Secretary-General called my work the gold standard for international refugee assistance. Before anyone could process what they'd heard, the doorbell rang. Mom answered to find a White House courier holding an official envelope. "Presidential Medal of Freedom delivery for Dr. Elena Vasquez," the courier announced formally. "Official invitation to the White House ceremony honoring her humanitarian service to displaced populations worldwide." The book club gasped collectively. Mrs. Patterson dropped her wine glass, and the sound of shattering crystal filled the suddenly silent room. "Dr. Vasquez," the courier continued, looking at me. "The President looks forward to honoring your life-saving work with refugees. Your innovations in crisis response have set new international standards for humanitarian assistance." I signed for the envelope while my mother's book club stared in stunned silence. The same women who'd spent the evening pitying my spinster lifestyle were now learning that I was receiving the nation's highest civilian honor. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I tried to," I said quietly. "Every time I mentioned my humanitarian work, you changed the subject to discuss when I was getting married." Mrs. Rodriguez was frantically Googling my name. "Elena, there are articles about you everywhere. Time Magazine, Washington Post, UN publications. They're calling you the humanitarian who revolutionized refugee assistance." The courier was still standing in the doorway. "Ma'am, the ceremony is in 3 weeks. The President specifically requested to meet you privately before the public event. Your work has influenced his administration's entire approach to international humanitarian crisis." After the courier left, the book club remained speechless. The invitation to the White House sat on the coffee table next to their discussion questions about this month's romance novel. "We had no idea you were so important," Janet said weakly. "Important to whom?" I asked. "To the 200,000 people whose lives were saved? Or important enough for you to respect my choices?" Mom reached for my hand. "Honey, we're family. We love you. We just didn't understand the scope of your work." "You didn't want to understand," I said, standing up from the couch. "You decided humanitarian work was a hobby, so everything I accomplished became irrelevant." I picked up my purse and headed for the door. "Enjoy the rest of book club. I have some calls to return from the State Department." "Where are you going?" Mrs. Patterson called after me. "Back to my sad spinster life," I said. "The one that just earned a Presidential Medal of Freedom." As I walked to my house next door, I could hear urgent whispers starting behind me. Tomorrow the entire neighborhood would know about the White House ceremony. Next week my family would probably be calling with requests to attend. But I was done seeking their approval. I'd built something meaningful while they complained about my choices, saving lives while they worried about my love life. 3 weeks later, I stood in the East Room of the White House as the President placed the Presidential Medal of Freedom around my neck. In my acceptance speech, I dedicated the honor to the displaced families I'd worked with and the aid workers who risked their lives daily. At the reception afterward, surrounded by fellow humanitarian leaders and government officials who understood the value of service, I felt more at home than I ever had at neighborhood gatherings. Sometimes the most important work is the kind other people can't understand, until the President of the United States honors you for it. My phone had been buzzing constantly since the news broke. Interview requests from major networks, invitations to speak at universities, and congratulations from humanitarian organizations worldwide. The Associated Press wanted an exclusive about my journey from neighborhood spinster to presidential medal recipient. But the most telling messages were from my family. Mom left a tearful voicemail about being so proud and wanting to attend the White House ceremony. Mrs. Patterson texted asking if she could bring her daughter to meet me. The same daughter she'd mentioned was, thankfully, normal, unlike me. Even Janet, who'd called my standards impossible just hours ago, was suddenly interested in my inspiring life story. The requests escalated quickly. Uncle Robert called about investment opportunities in my humanitarian organization. My cousin Maria wanted to discuss her daughter's college application essay about being inspired by her humanitarian aunt. Dad suggested I write a book about my experiences and mentioned his friend who knew someone in publishing. I ignored them all. The White House ceremony was held on a crisp October morning. 21 Americans received the Presidential Medal of Freedom that day: scientists, artists, civil rights leaders, and public servants who dedicated their lives to improving humanity. As I stood in the East Room listening to the Marine Band play, I thought about the refugee families whose photos lined my office wall. Dr. Elena Vasquez has saved more lives than most people will ever touch, the president said during my introduction. Her innovative crisis response protocols have become the global standard for humanitarian assistance. She represents the best of American values: service, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to human dignity. The medal was heavier than I'd expected, the ribbon settling around my neck like a tangible reminder of all the sleepless nights spent coordinating aid shipments, all the negotiations with hostile governments, all the times I'd chosen dangerous refugee camps over safe dinner parties. After the ceremony, reporters asked about my family's reaction to learning about my work through the news. Sometimes the people closest to us can't see our potential, I said. They cling to their idea of who we should be, not who we are. The quote spread in journals and magazines. Young women studying international relations wrote to me, sharing how their families pushed them toward practical careers. 6 months later, I launched the Elena Vasquez Foundation for Women in Humanitarian Work. It offered fellowships for women in refugee aid, disaster relief, and development. The White House hosted the launch. The president praised it as a way to grow future humanitarian leaders. My family came to the gala. They looked out of place among diplomats and aid workers. They hovered near the food while I spoke to global media. "We want to understand your work," Mom said. "I tried for 10 years, I replied as the UN Deputy Secretary General approached. "You called it avoiding reality." The foundation grew fast. Applications came from women told their dreams were unsafe or impractical. The first fellowship went to a refugee law student whose parents wanted her to sell real estate instead. A year later, I stood at the annual gala before ambassadors, leaders, and fellows already changing lives in crisis zones. It was proof of everything my family said was impossible. A career of service, a community of purpose and respect built by saving lives. The most radical thing you can do, I told them, is refuse to shrink your dreams to fit other people's limits. The world needs your bold ideas, your commitment, your courage, even when others call it impractical. That speech became our motto. Because the life others call impossible may be the one the world needs most.